Hello, everybody, and welcome on back to the Archeo Gaming Conference 2022. I am here with Pixlriffs to talk about archaeology and Minecraft. I have to say that when I first heard you talk about your empire in your first episode of Empires SMP Season 2, and you said you were being an archaeologist, I was like, hang on now. we need to talk. This is going to be great. And this conference was coming up, and it just seemed like a perfect opportunity to get a sense of what I don't know, to just pick your brain a bit about archaeology and Minecraft. And so this is
Yeah.
a fairly chill conversation. We're not expecting to it's not a super formal thing.
Oh
But
yeah.
we're
Because
gonna
I'm gonna put my foot in my mouth if I start to talk anything about like actual archaeology.
which
But
is
yeah,
perfectly
well,
fair. A lot of, I mean, archaeologists do that too, so so don't
fair.
worry.
Yeah.
Um,
hmm
but yeah, and just as we're kind of talking, I will just say the video that is that is behind us, really, or in front of us, is us doing a time lapse. Well, we built the treasury at Petra in Jordan, which is a very well known archaeological site. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we got together on a server and did this build. So if you tuned in for the last talk and saw some of my archaeology site builds, we were talking about this a lot. And even if you didn't, it's a cool build. So feel free to enjoy.
I think we did pretty well. I'm
I
really
think so
happy with it.
too. Yeah. I think you'll notice that we couldn't get the statues really. There in everywhere you see granite in that second level, there are statues, and we couldn't quite get those due to scale issues in Minecraft.
Yep.
Scale and people in Minecraft, statues are hard.
hmm
And I think when I was doing the Temple of Zeus, I just gave up and didn't build the statue because I had like a 2x3 square. I was like, this is not going to work. so,
Yeah,
so
there's
yeah.
a couple of ways that you can fudge some things, and you can use armor stands, which
Mm-hmm.
are normally just like freestanding suits of armor that you can place in the game. They're about player
Yeah.
scale,
Mm-hmm.
and you can pose those to a limited extent. But if you start to get into the individual like little poses that you can put them in, you're going to be
Yeah.
there for an additional 2 hours. And
Yeah.
there are people who specialize in that. Zombie Cleo
Yeah.
springs to mind, and oh my goodness, the amount of time and effort and dedication that goes into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
uh, this was a little bit too casual of a project for us to really put that amount of effort in. Sorry,
Yeah.
but it came together pretty well regardless.
Yeah.
It's all about approximation and kind of fudging some of the details to give people the bigger picture.
Exactly. And this was a project that's an example, again, of something I was talking about earlier, where we had the scale, but we also kind of had to fudge it a little bit. It's a
Yes.
little bit wider than it's supposed to be technically, but it doesn't really matter, and the sense of the place is still there. So that's something to keep in mind with archaeological builds in Minecraft, is that you fudge the details a little bit in favor of immersion and narrative and everything. And I think this build came out really well. It's really really cool. I was looking at it again today, and it's just good. It's a good
Do,
build.
do you want to briefly credit our sources? Because there were some fantastic resources that you were able to link me to
Yes.
online that gave us 3D models and photo reference and drawings
Yes.
and sketches and all sorts of stuff that we were using throughout the process as
Yeah.
reference.
So, hang on. Let me see if I can. Have I closed out of their window. So I was like, can I get their link really quickly again? The Hang on. This is, yes, the Zamani project is a archaeological documentation project. They do a lot of 3D modeling, and my PhD was actually in 3D modeling, so I can navigate 3D models quite well. Theirs are really really good. They have a number of sites that they've done this for. A lot of them are in Africa, or the Middle East, and it's just phenomenal what they've been able to do. And you can go onto their website. It's just zamaniproject.org. I don't know if I'm able to put the link in chat, but if somebody can, that would be great. And they have so many sites. You can just go and look at all of their 3D models for all of these sites. And the thing that I think we both enjoyed the most about I mean, we enjoyed a lot about their 3D models of Petra, but the thing I at least enjoyed the most was that in every part of the 3D model that they had a camel for scale in their 3D
Yes.
model, which was pretty great. So that project is very much, yeah, the majority
Yeah.
of our information was coming from them.
And
And then
I will take our fudging of the scale from the fact that there are no camels in Minecraft currently, so we
yes,
weren't sure about what the scale would be.
yes, absolutely. That's a better explanation than any other one we'd be able to come up with. So I'd go with that. Yeah, so I very much recommend, and yeah, Short Rounds put the link in chat. So I very much recommend checking out their website. They have so many sites, and it's you can just explore the 3D models. They're all on a site called Sketchfab, which is a site that's been around for a while, hosting 3D models, and you can just explore them. It's really, really cool. So big props, major props to the Zamani project. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about Petra and how cool Petra is, because Petra it's pretty cool. But what about, let's see, we should probably talk about archaeology and Minecraft a little more generally at a certain point. Um, I'm wondering where we should start. I guess the one of the things, so as I've played Minecraft, I played Minecraft long before I approached it from an archaeological perspective, and just as a player. And I noticed when I started making videos about archaeology in Minecraft that the way I approached the game changed kind of
Hmm.
drastically in some ways. And I was wondering if you noticed ways that the game has changed for you now that you're building the past in Empire's SMP. What are some almost unexpected ways that the game kind of changed for you?
Yeah, so Minecraft is a game where we have a pretty incredible level of control over our environment. And it's sort of the hallmark of the game, really, where other video games might have a kind of a fixed environment in which you can only interact with certain enemies or objects, but you can't really alter the layout of a level because that often breaks the designer's intentions for how you're supposed to complete objectives.
Yeah,
Minecraft is a sandbox,
yeah.
so that allows the player to change virtually everything about the environment around them, which I have found over the years, not just in Empires but in other ways, um, in other worlds, in other servers, gives you a kind of sense of ownership or stewardship, perhaps more appropriate to this context,
Mm,
over the world. And you start thinking of ways in which you want it to be protected or preserved.
hmm.
And so there's a few things in Minecraft that I've sort of adopted as behaviors that really reflect that kind of preservational attitude. So initially in survival Minecraft, you're encouraged to think of everything as a resource, right? You know,
Hmm.
you're mining cobblestone with the intention of using it to build your own structures, make stone tools, and so forth. And later on, once you start to develop abundance of certain types of resources, you start to be a little bit more specific about when you acquire different types of resources and what you use them for,
Yeah.
and whether that stuff is being put back into the environment. I mean, I think the most basic example is when you chop down a tree, the leaves will typically decay, or you can break the leaves manually,
Hmm.
and they will drop saplings. And more often than not, if you are used to the gameplay cycle of Minecraft, one of those saplings you just replant on the spot where the
Yeah,
tree was taken down. And
absolutely.
that means that not necessarily an identical tree, but a similar type of tree is going to grow in the same place. And you start to think of things as renewable resources. Later on, obviously, you know, there are some more fantastical things like the ability to farm bone meal, which
Yeah.
is in Minecraft, it's used as a kind of instant fertilizer. You throw a handful of bone meal on a crop and it grows one stage, so you can instantly grow food, which is required for the player's survival.
Hmm.
And the earliest sources of bone meal available to the player are composting things. If you can grab a bit of wood and throw together a composter, you can start to compost leaves, other saplings, surplus crops, other
Hmm.
kinds of organic waste. Alternatively, you can go out and attack an animated skeleton carrying a bow and arrow. It will drop some of its bones when you kill it, and then you
Yeah.
can turn those into bone meal. And that's, the game's version of fertilizer.
Hmm.
Um, but then later on, when you encounter a fossil in the game, and fossils are large bone structures that generate underground in specific Minecraft biomes. They're in deserts, they're in swamps. They will
Hmm.
sometimes be completely buried in the ground. Other times, you'll find bone blocks just sticking out of the wall of a cave. And they're relatively uncommon. Each of them is composed of between 30 and 120 blocks of bone, each of which provides a lot of bone meal.
Yeah.
And you inherently understand its value as a resource at that point, and you can kind of weigh it against the rarity of encountering a naturally generated feature like that. And that's the kind of stuff that more recently I've started to think of not as a resource, but as something about the world that needs to be preserved, because you don't really encounter them all that often. And on Empire's SMP, this led to a particularly funny incident where one of
It's so
our
good.
members was streaming and encountered a fossil. And if you find a fossil low enough down in the world, it generates with some of the bone blocks replaced with diamond ore. And diamond, as you probably know from, if you know anything about Minecraft, you know that diamonds are some of the rarest materials in the game and some of the most useful. They're used to craft the tools and armor that have some of the highest durability and can break any kinds of block that it's possible for a player to break. And so you typically want diamonds in the earliest stages of the game so that you can not have to worry about your tools breaking in the middle of a project and you can keep going with those. But since none of us had ever seen one of these fossils generating with diamond ore in it before, a bunch of us from the server were watching Jimmy streaming and said, "No, don't break the diamonds in the fossil. Don't break down this fossil. Yes, it's a ton of resources, and you're still really early in the stages of the world, but it feels like you are desecrating something at that point.
Yeah.
It feels like you are, there are other ways of acquiring those resources, and just because it's all packaged there in front of you, you want to take it, don't take it."
Yeah.
And eventually he ended up taking the diamonds but leaving the bones. And I went back later with a bunch of diamond ore that I had found elsewhere, and I made him
Made
put
him
it
put them
back.
back. It's
Yeah,
great.
which has kind of turned into like a bit of a plot element. We were
Yeah.
talking about, whether or not he was cursed as a result of disturbing the bones of this ancient creature, but in the end it turned into something that we wanted to preserve. And I even went back and built a kind of facsimile of a display case
Yeah.
around it with him later, with like a little gold plaque on the front of it that said when he'd found it, and
Yeah.
glass all the way around the outside to prevent anybody from disturbing it in future.
Yeah, and I think there was a really interesting discussion that you and Jimmy had about, is the fossil, if the diamond ore that gets put back isn't the diamond ore that was taken out, does it still count as a
Yes, yeah, it's
fossil?
the
Which
ship
is
of Theseus problem. Yeah,
exactly,
it's like, is it
it's a
still the same
discussion.
fossil?
Yeah, it's a discussion that happens in archaeology all the time as well, of, if a building, if its walls get replaced and its doors gets replaced and, the roof is different, is it still the same? I mean, it's in the same spot, so it's technically the same building, but is
Yeah.
it? And what I really loved about that interaction as well is that you then built that case around it with a documentation of, what date Jimmy found it. And then, of course, when Joel found multiple skeleton horses, they ended up in one of those cases as well. So now
Yes.
there's almost a pattern or a culture in Empire's SMP of preserving these elements of the game in situ, these really rare elements of the game. They haven't been, like, the fossil is where it was still found. It wasn't like it got moved or anything. And the same with the horses. They're basically where they were found, or at least where Joel put them
Which
once
was
he
in
found
in a
them.
really inconvenient place for Joel as well, which I found quite
Yeah,
funny.
it's quite great. It's good. But it's interesting too, because that leads to, we have these questions a lot in archaeology of how, preferably archaeology is a destructive practice no matter what you do, because once you dig something, you can't dig it again. You've already
Yeah.
dug it. And so a lot of archaeology is figuring out when to dig something and when to preserve it in the ground, or if you can't preserve it in the ground, preserving it somewhere else and where that other place is. So it's really interesting to see that within only a few weeks of Empire's SMP existing, there's already these questions of what do we do with these rare things that we find, and how do we preserve them. And I think somebody in chat, sorry, I need to scroll up to find who it was. I think it was, yeah, Classy Phantom was talking about the sense of preservation. Actually, a number of people were talking about preservation, and one of the things that you were mentioning is preserving a landscape. So digging, when the then named mesa biomes first appeared, you said that for you and various friends, it was a craft to really kind of dig underneath the mesa biome so that the actual surface of it looked the same. And then
Yeah.
Classy Phantom is talking about keeping their first wooden pickaxe and putting it where they
Yes.
see it constantly. And there's also this culture in a lot of players where they, maybe not the wooden tools, but usually it's either the wooden tools or the diamond tools or both, or say diamond sets of armor that'll be preserved, maps that get made of build areas that then get locked so that you can see the progression between the builds at different phases. So yeah, there's a huge amount of preservation that's happening in Minecraft of this virtual digital world, and recreating a certain number of the conversations that archaeologists have on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think the one of the key differences in Minecraft is that because of the way the game's mechanics have been structured, so many of those materials are renewable. So
Mm,
ore blocks are potentially an example of one resource that isn't. So if you were to dig out an entire mountain and take all of the resources from it, which are the more precious resources, everything from coal through iron on down to diamonds, emeralds, and redstone, and all of the other ores that you'll find, you could then fill the entire thing back up again with stone that you have generated renewably by having
mm-hmm.
lava and water mix, and that generates a
Yeah.
block of cobblestone, or you can have it generate natural stone, which you can then pull out and put back in whatever location. You could effectively restore the landscape minus those precious resources,
Mm,
and it would be as though things were virtually untouched. But you're also talking about an infinite world, or more or less. I mean, Minecraft worlds are not infinite, but they are
they're
near
very
enough
large.
infinite that
Yeah.
yes, nobody. I think it would take a lifetime to fully explore one Minecraft world, and you might be,
Yeah.
other generations might have to take over at that point. It'd be a full-time job at least, but
Yeah.
I think the amount of resources that we know for certain are out there in the world because of what is known about the game's structure, it trivializes some of those preservation things. So we're doing it out of a sense of role play and
Mm-hmm.
sentimentality more than we are out of a necessity, out of a desire to keep some of that stuff
Yeah.
precisely as it was, for preserving it for future generations.
Yeah. And there is an element there of the types of preservation that we see in Minecraft, at least on a more public scale, are the Minecraft servers that are, major SMPs with content
Hmm.
creators. And there is a degree to which you don't want to destroy the landscape because then your content doesn't look as good. so
Yeah.
so there is a part of me that wonders I mean, having been on private servers, it does end up being similar, but I wonder if there's almost more of a sense of needing to preserve the landscape itself in, among content creators in their SMPs than necessarily in, say, private servers or other players.
Yeah, I mean, with SMP especially, and with video content and streaming content, a lot of the
Yeah.
time we can think of the world more as the set for a TV production or a film, more than a place that we are actively living in. So
Yeah.
it's more about, you wouldn't want to go onto a movie set and then tear down half of the scenery before they were done with it, and it's the same kind of principle.
Yeah.
If you've got something that you're really happy with, a landscape that you've got in the background, you don't want somebody to come and take all of the snow off the top of your mountain when you thought it was really pretty with all the snow still there.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's where potentially, yeah, things can get a little bit tense between different players. But it's all about understanding what the environment signifies and what changes everybody is planning on making to it. So a lot of it just comes down to communication between players at that stage.
Yeah. And there's a question in chat. There is one that's a little further up that I do want to get to, but there's a question on this topic in chats asking the sense of preservation, if basically the sense of preservation emerges from the players rather than the setup of Minecraft. And I would say that's the case because
Yeah.
Minecraft doesn't there aren't really rules in, I mean, there are technically game rules in Minecraft, but if it's your own world, you can do whatever you want. So nobody's stopping you from completely destroying a desert biome for all of the sand that it has.
Oh yes.
And a lot of, there's a lot of that content as well on YouTube channels and SMPs and things in those public servers. But a lot of the time, what people in those do is they go to a desert biome that is so far away from where everybody else is that it doesn't matter that it gets completely destroyed. But there is this interesting element of preservation of the landscape that the players are playing in, but complete destruction of the landscape that they're not playing in at
Yeah.
times. And part of that is because of the resources in Minecraft. In order to build things, you do need to collect the resources from the world. You start with nothing. And some of them are renewable resources, but things like sand are not. And it kind of depends on the resource. So things that are rarer do have a tendency to encourage players to go into a preservation mode, such as, say, sand or gravel, but even things that are more precious, like diamonds or netherite or something. There are lots of players that will collect all of the ore that they find of precious metals until they can get an enchantment that allows them to get like 2 or 3 times as much of the precious thing that ore is. So say diamond ore, it'll allow them to get 2 or 3 times as many diamonds as they would if they had just mined it originally. So there
Yeah.
are lots of people who will preserve those until they're at a certain stage of the game, and get very annoyed if anybody else comes along and takes their their
Yeah.
diamond
My
ore.
My personal one is emerald ore.
Yes.
Emeralds are used as currency for trading with Minecraft's indigenous population, the villagers.
Mm-hmm.
And we could get into a whole philosophical discussion about whether or not the player is indigenous. But either
Yeah.
way, emerald ore can be found throughout the environment in mountain biomes specifically, which are a subgroup of biomes. There are about 50 biomes in the world. Mountains count for about 5 of those.
Yeah.
So you're still only finding it in about 1/10 of the area of the world. You only find it within a certain range of depth in the world. And when you break it, it turns into 1 emerald, or if you have an enchanted pickaxe that allows you to get more resources, it can break down into a maximum
Mm-hmm.
of 4 emeralds. But emeralds are so easily acquired from villagers if you want to trade sticks to a fletcher so that they can make more arrows for you,
Yeah.
then you can acquire emeralds so easily that way. You can chop down a tree and trade to get enough
Mm-hmm.
emeralds that you've probably got 4 emeralds.
Yeah.
So there really is no functional reason to break emerald ore at all. And so that's become my personal I don't want to use the term crusade, but that's the kind of how I'm thinking of it.
Yeah.
Of like, I try and encourage people to preserve blocks of emerald ore
Yeah.
instead of breaking them, because those are effectively one of the rarer blocks of ore in the game, because
Yeah.
they can only be found in such a small area. And there's
Exactly.
no need to break them down for currency because you can acquire currency through trading.
Yeah. I particularly love the in your latest episode of Empires, the creation of the emerald ore fountain, where
Yeah.
basically people can come
Yes.
and deposit emerald ore and get probably more emeralds back than they would have ever gotten from the emerald ore in the
Yes.
first place. And the entire reason is so that Pix can have all of the emerald ore, and people can still get their emeralds. But it's like, please don't destroy the emerald ore. I will give you more emeralds. I will give you a
Yeah.
better deal.
I
Yeah.
joke that I'm hoarding it like a dragon, but what I really want is for it to the assurance that it has not been broken
Yeah.
is really what I'm after.
Yeah. One of the questions we had earlier, hang on, let me scroll to it, is curious to know whether our sense of preservation in Minecraft has now translated into having a greater sense of preservation in the real world. This is from IndieCraftCom. Or was it our existing sense of preservation in the real world that has translated into preservation of our Minecraft world? Which I think is a really interesting question.
Yeah, I think in my case, the instincts probably grew up together rather than one happening and then the other. I mean, I've
Mm-hmm.
always, since I've been a kid, I've gone to museums, and the UK has some fantastic museums, especially in
Yes.
London. And
Yeah.
I've always loved going to the Natural History Museum and a few other places. And in my adult life, I've returned to those with much more enthusiasm than I think I had when I was a kid. And it was just someplace your parents took you to for the day.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think obviously Minecraft has taught me a lot about valuing certain things, and a lot about social interaction in a space where you can make as many changes as you want to. I think if anything, um, we're so used to things being kind of post scarcity in Minecraft after a certain
Yeah.
point that you can't really translate those ideals to the real world. And
Mm-hmm.
especially with everything that's going on environmentally right now, and people pushing for a greater understanding of the climate crisis we're facing, I think that kind of stuff is being pushed more to the fore as I leave the virtual world and come back to the world where I need to be a responsible adult.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if Minecraft is necessarily prompting that, but I think it's still a force for good. If you
Mm.
look at what the Minecraft team is doing in a kind of on a meta level from the game itself, Minecraft has been responsible for a lot of conservation charity
Yeah.
work when it comes to
Yes.
and non-profit work when it comes to preserving coral reefs.
Yeah.
Mangrove biomes were recently
Mhm.
added to the game in the most recent update, and that was kind of prompted by one of the Minecraft developers having a project called Love Tropics, where every
Yeah.
year they raise money for a conservation charity working in the tropics of the world. And that was focused on mangrove forest in Costa Rica
Mhm.
in, I think, last year. And so, yeah, it's obviously been something that's been on their minds, and they quite frequently encourage players to get involved with stewardship of
Yeah.
the actual world as opposed to just their Minecraft worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially with their oh yeah, and somebody's mentioning their recent collaboration with the National Trust
Yes,
as well,
yes,
which was hilarious because they announced it as soon as Pix and I finished building Petra. We
yeah,
we were
absolutely.
talking about
What
things like
timing?
this, and then we logged onto Twitter and it was like, "Oh, we're partnering with the National Trust." We're like, "Oh, that's helpful."
Yeah, and then you've
So
got Grian building Corf Castle with somebody from the
yeah,
National Trust kind of telling him how some of these structures would have looked, and then they've
yeah,
released that map so that players can
it's
download it and
so good.
have their own take on what that castle might have looked like if they built it. And yeah,
Yeah.
there's some really cool stuff going on.
It's really, really good. So, and there's also, just for those in the chat who are more from an archaeology background than a Minecraft background, just for context, Pixlriffs has actually built an entire museum in Minecraft, a Minecraft museum in Minecraft. So back at the start when he said he had never seen a fossil with diamond ore in it, he's literally built the museum. So it's a very rare thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was actually how I kind of got introduced to your channel. I think I ended up just kind of browsing Twitch and you were working on, I think, the tree room or something. And I was like, this is
Yes.
interesting.
Uh-huh.
And the number of ways that, as you started getting into it, I was like, I never really thought about exactly how many different trees there are and how they grow. And
Mm.
yeah, and suddenly I was writing my PhD while you were building trees. And yeah, so there's a lot of there are a lot of heritage practices that already exist in Minecraft communities and Minecraft worlds. And a museum, in a server, that's an idea that people will do in their servers once they've kind of established everything and gotten their farms and they're set up and they're kind of like, what else do I do in my Minecraft world? One of the top suggestions is building a block museum or a Minecraft museum.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of work there as well.
Yeah, I'm quite big on encouraging people to like touch every part of the game if they are interested in getting more out of the experience of playing Minecraft. Often people get stuck in a rut. They load up a new world, they play until they have diamond armor, they fight the dragon at the end of the
Yeah.
game, and then that's it. And what do they do? And so I often encourage people to try and collect one of everything in the game.
Hmm.
And because that's something that I wanted to do when I started playing the game back on the Xbox 360 edition
Yeah.
in 2014.
Back when
One
there
of
were a
my
lot fewer things to collect.
Yes, and it was still quite a task. And
Yeah.
one of the things I wanted to do was really understand what the game had to offer, what blocks I could build with, what
Yeah.
different blocks did and their properties.
Hmm.
And I was going to work on the bus reading the Minecraft wiki, trying to understand what was I missing, like what
Yeah.
else was still out there. And so I ended up making a kind of proto version of the museum that I ended up building, on a larger scale in my Minecraft survival guide series on YouTube. And that ended up, yeah, kind of bringing forward into my Minecraft life this desire to touch every block in the game at least once,
Mm.
and find everything that was on offer. And I think that's a really good thing. Taking that to another level, when you're looking at community as a players who have been together for a long time, one of the
Hmm.
instincts that we have is to preserve memories and past
Yeah.
practices from previous iterations of the server. If you look at what Hermitcraft is doing, for
Yeah.
example, a lot of the time there will be, from season to season of Hermitcraft, think of them as like seasons of TV. They will keep the same cast but move to a completely different world. They'll
Yeah.
start building completely different things, but occasionally one of them brings something over from the previous world that they either weren't done with or they want to be the catalyst for what they do next on the new season.
Yeah.
And this happened kind of recently where Grian had built a
I
mansion
mentioned,
that
yeah.
was effectively auctioned off to two people who won they basically bid the same amount for it,
Yeah.
and they each took half of it, and then they built half of it in different places on the server next time they reset the world for a
Yeah.
new season. And so they're effectively, reproducing something block for block,
Mhm.
down to the foundations of this build. They got everything exactly the
Yeah.
same, and then use that as the springboard to get on with the rest of their season.
Yeah.
In season 3 of Hermitcraft, Biffa, who no longer plays on the server, but he was working on a museum where effectively it wasn't so much to do with everything that was part of the game itself, but it was to do with their own achievements. And each hermit was encouraged to come to the museum. They had a set, like a plot inside this museum where they could build something that represented
Mm.
what they were doing, whether it was
Yeah.
a contraption they'd wired together with redstone, or, a statue that was emblematic of whatever it was they were building at their base. And so, encouraging the community to come together and participate in one project that kind of shows the breadth of what they're doing on that server is, part of the experience of being in one of those communities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting to see the consistency between seasons of SMPs, and we were talking a little bit about this as well. The preservation of like world downloads.
Yeah.
The every not every SMP, but pretty much most SMPs and many content creators, even if it's a single player world, will have a world download of a major world for a major series that they're doing on their channel. And what I found interesting is that in the last season, well, the first season of Empire's SMP, and the latest season of Hermitcraft to have finished, both of those servers were catastrophically destroyed by different mechanisms. But the
Hmm.
lore in those servers, the story around it was that they were both catastrophically destroyed. But the world downloads that players that the public can kind of wander around are actually preserved just in the moment before the catastrophe hits.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's interesting from an archaeological perspective because that's not how we would find it in the ground if it existed in reality, or even in
Yeah.
Minecraft if we were digging that up, ages and ages later. It's not remotely how it would look, but that's how a lot of the world downloads are, and it begs the question of, when do you create a world? Like, there's a common question in archaeology. Let me back up slightly. When we're talking about buildings and restoring buildings or sites to a particular time period, we have to decide when to restore them to and why we're choosing that time period. It's pretty rare that any site has only like one period of activity and then it's done for forever. Particularly the further back you go, like Neolithic sites have been reused. Certainly in the UK, pretty much every Neolithic site has been reused for various other things by various different people for a very long time. People are
Hmm.
people, and they've always been people. So even when it comes to, say, like a farmhouse in, I worked in museums in New England, so there was a colonial farmhouse that I worked at for a long time, and there was a constant question of, what year do we replicate, because this farmhouse has been here for 250 years and it's changed shape in those 250 years. So how do we
Hmm.
decide when to preserve it? And I think it's interesting to see that question arise with Minecraft worlds as well, even though they're digital and even though they're, not necessarily, I don't know, they don't necessarily need to be preserved, but at the same time we want to preserve them. It's an interesting thing to have in that
Yeah. It
question.
it's sentimentality that wants you to preserve it. Really, it's a sense of, this being something that you experienced, whether as an audience member or participant. You've
Yeah.
you've kind of left your mark on it in a sense, and it's made its mark on you in return.
Mm.
I think one of the other ways we can look at that is the way players use existing buildings within Minecraft's kind of default world. So
Yes.
players actively reuse and modify existing buildings all the time. It's
Mhm.
very common for a player to move into a village because, there are pre-built structures, they provide shelter, there's a place to sleep, often there is food, and a lot of those are very useful to the beginning of a survival experience. And so when you're done using that and you decide, hey, I actually want to move out of here because there's not enough space to store all of the items that I've got, or, I have long-term plans to build a more grand house for myself, or you want to go elsewhere in the world and you don't think you'll return to this, do you pack everything up and leave and make it as though you were never there? Because, the villagers don't have the kind of memory that stores, they don't have an oral history of any kind. They're not going to say, a player stayed here once. You
Yeah.
can leave that area and have it be as though you were never there, despite it having had such an impact on the beginning of your experience in that world.
Yeah.
And so there is, because it's digital and because everything is a block and it's so clean, there is the ability to kind of, cover your own footsteps and make it appear as though you were never there, even when it can have had a remarkable effect on the beginning of your experience.
Yeah, and I think it's actually almost even more common for players to just leave the spawn area, get the first bits of wood, make the wooden tools, maybe get some stone, and then just find a different biome. Because a lot of the time, there are many players who will find seeds that they're actually, and seeds in terms of Minecraft worlds that they're interested in playing in. But there are also a lot of players who, to be honest, can't be arsed. So they just keep doing random seeds until they find, or they do a random seed and then find the biome that they want to build in. So there's kind of these two different ways of approaching the game, but as you say, it's entirely possible to be in an area of the game and have no record of being in that area of the game. And RIG Christie is saying that the Historic New England, which is the company I worked for actually, that they came to the conclusion they were often restoring a building to something that it had never actually been in the first place, because they were trying to highlight all of these different periods, which I don't think we necessarily get in Minecraft worlds, but only because, and this is another element we've been talking about a little bit, only because there's less tendency for players to take a build down once they've built it. There's an element of, I've built this building, I don't want to destroy it because I spent so long building it, so I'm going to leave it there. So if I need another, if I need more space or if I need another building, usually players will more, say, add on to a build that's already there, or they'll build a new building or dig down into a cave or something rather than taking an actual building down instead.
Yeah. Let's take another example from the generated structures in Minecraft. If you go into the Nether, there are two different types of structures you will typically find in the Nether, the larger ones at least, are Nether fortresses and bastion remnants. Bastion remnants are of particular interest because they are the remains of a society of pig humanoids called piglins, and you might be used to the zombie version of that if you've played earlier versions of Minecraft. But in Minecraft 1.16, the Nether update, they added a non-zombified civilization who are a bit more rudimentary in terms of how they trade with you. They tend to get angry with you if you're not wearing gold, because they see gold as a symbol of status or friendship.
And if you open a chest, you're in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're very protective of their resources, and they are basically this long lost civilization, and it's left to the player to speculate about how they ended up there, if it's where they originate from, or if they came from the overworld or anything like that. There's a variety of theories out there about which way this could go. But their homes in the Nether are these grand structures made out of crumbling material. And in Minecraft, because everything is a block, it's difficult to illustrate anything as ruined without making it massive. And so these structures are often very large and composed of different chambers, different houses, towers, large battlements, as though they were part of some kind of larger fortress. But then sections of them have been systematically removed and almost like carefully removed by the developers when they were designing the structures to look as though they have crumbled away and that the past has had an effect on them. That's not a mechanic that exists in Minecraft. These structures won't continue to deteriorate once you find them. They have just fallen apart, and often to the point where they defy gravity, because gravity isn't, as you were discussing earlier, not really a thing in Minecraft except for very specific blocks. And the player can restore one of those. And it's something I've tried to do in the past of, like, you can get an idea of what the floor plan is. You can look at different sections which are symmetrical, have rotational symmetry, and think, okay, this section where the floor is missing would probably be filled in with this type of block in this pattern. You can acquire the resources and you can start to put carpet in if you want to. You can
Yeah.
make a storage area. And by that same example, like, are you restoring this thing to its former glory? Well, no, because not only are these things designed to be ruined, there is no prior record of
Yeah.
them
Of the
before this,
former
to the point
glory.
where
Yeah.
the idea that they have any kind of history on a metafictional level is a lie, because they never existed prior to a certain point in the game's development, and they were added
Yeah.
into the game as ruins. But each Minecraft world kind of comes with a past that's built in on a game level and is entirely up to player interpretation
Yeah.
and speculation about what that past was.
Yeah, and the same is true of abandoned villages. So there are villages that basically are just covered in cobwebs and often have mobs in them, enemies in them. So, if you like peaceful Minecraft play, you don't go to an abandoned village. But
Hmm.
yeah, there are villages that have been abandoned and taken over by these monsters. And then there are also like the desert temples and jungle temples, which are structures that no living, well, aside from maybe some monsters who are spawning when it's dark, there are no, villagers in those structures. There are no humanoid creatures in those structures. So there actually is quite a number of abandoned structures in Minecraft that were abandoned long before the player joined the game, basically. And the one that people are bringing up in the chat, quite rightly, is the newest one to be added to Minecraft, which are the ancient cities,
Mm.
which are basically cities that are very, very deep in the world, so deep that they exist in a space called the Deep Dark, which is still the overworld, but it's a very dangerous part of the overworld. And they have wardens who will destroy you, basically, if you're too noisy. The wardens are basically librarians on steroids. If you're quiet enough, they don't really care, but but if you're not quiet, they have a lot to say about it, and they're very, very dangerous. And that's one of the first, or one of the only really monsters in Minecraft where the design is to avoid them rather than to fight them. So ancient cities have caused people to approach these spaces. Well, the wardens have caused people to approach ancient cities really in a very different way to how they approach the rest of Minecraft. But there is also a lot in ancient cities. There are redstone circuits. So redstone is basically Minecraft's equivalent of electricity, for those who don't necessarily know. It's more complicated than, well, I'm not an engineer. So so
Me neither.
redstone feels complicated to me at a certain point. I know certain circuits, I've just got them memorized and I know they work, and then other ones I'm like, I don't know what's happening here. I'm impressed that somebody can make a robot in Minecraft. I don't know how to do it myself. But there are those kinds of circuits down there, and it's very clear, there are chests with goods still in them. So there's definitely this sense that it is a past civilization that was there that no longer is anymore. And the question becomes, where did they go? And did they bring the wardens, or are the wardens part of the reason they left? So yeah, there's a lot of the structures that exist in Minecraft are really quite interesting in that regard.
Yeah, and you don't see a huge amount of similar iconography between different structures. Like
Yes.
the stuff that you'll find in ancient cities that suggests anybody was there, you'll find a few candles around altars, you'll find
Hmm.
chests of different resources. You'll also find a section towards the middle which typically has a bunch of wooden posts and wool, as though there have been tents there made out
Hmm.
of wool blocks that have fallen in. And if you dig those up, there's even a campfire unlit underneath
Yeah.
all of those. So
Yeah.
it's kind of implied that this was some sort of campsite for somebody else going down there and finding the site afterwards, and then
Hmm.
maybe disappearing in mysterious circumstances. Because
Yeah.
if you imagine this having been a city, there is no real reason for there to have been a campsite outside of where people might have been living
Yeah.
in the first place.
Exactly.
Um, and so that also serves the gameplay purpose of providing the player with wool, which you can then repurpose to walk around on, because that muffles your footsteps and it's
Mm.
harder to be detected by the warden. So it serves a lot of different purposes. But from a world lore perspective, it suggests that there are people other than you who have gone there before. And
Yes.
again, what's happened to them is kind of curious.
Yeah.
But if you look at other civilizations that use wool, the villagers will use it
Hmm.
occasionally in their villages. They have beds which are made of wool. And I think the other group that uses wool most commonly is illagers, who are a
Mm-hmm.
kind of an offshoot of villager civilization. They're the grumpy cousins of the villagers, and they're typically more hostile to the player, and they live in these large woodland mansions. But
Yeah.
a lot of their iconography is very self-centered. They tend to build large wool faces of themselves that hang in corridors. They have large kind of wool statues of one of them,
Mm-hmm.
like holding a shovel or a wand or something like that. I'm not quite sure what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And they've got like a variety of different wool statues that you find if you explore a woodland mansion. But you don't find any pillager iconography in the ancient cities, so you
Yeah.
don't find them having left one of their banners there with the pillager
Mm-hmm.
face on or anything. So it's an interesting debate as to who exactly those previous visitors were.
It
And that's
is.
one of the only structures in Minecraft that really shows any signs of people having been there who weren't the originators of the structure itself.
Yeah, and there's also, because I was kind of looking at the wiki for ancient cities just to get my head around some of the bits that I'm not as familiar with, and I came across a note that there are in at least certain ancient cities, a certain number of the structures are reminiscent of woodland mansions and pillager outposts,
Hmm.
which I kind of clocked before, but hadn't necessarily with connection to ancient cities. But it does propose a possibility that, say, the skulk coming out of the ancient city has corrupted people, or has, has done something, and then, you've got villagers, and then you've got pillagers, and there's a whole bunch of potential
Mm.
lore there. But it is interesting. I think, as you say, it's one of the only structures to have a sign that people who weren't the originators were also there and investigating, but also b to have similarities to other structures in Minecraft that are not remotely connected to the biome that this structure is in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. Somebody was asking the chat, Danny was asking, do you think there's value in learning about structures in human history by looking at the process of building something similar in Minecraft? I certainly think that there is a lot to be learned about a site or a structure by building it in Minecraft. And Pixlriffs, you can agree or disagree, but I certainly, I mean, I'm an archaeologist. I already knew a certain amount about Petra as we were building it, but I did not know all about Petra that would be required to build it. And there's a lot there that, was new to me, basically. And the same is true for all of the sites that I was showing a little while ago in my own talk. Every single site, even if they're very well known archaeological sites, and I knew about them before, there's still information there that I didn't know about. Now, granted, those sites, a lot of them I was making for a video where I talked about why the sites are interesting, so it's not just building the site that was giving me new information. But there's an element of building a site, and the same is true for, say, photographing a site, or especially making a 3D model of a structure. It's a similar, having done both, it's a similar kind of sense of you end up becoming kind of intimately familiar with the structure because you're physically creating it. And you have to, in archaeology, a lot of the time when there are things that we don't necessarily know, we'll just kind of leave the gap there. But if you're building a building, you can't just leave a big gaping hole in a building unless you intend to. But if you're trying to build a site in Minecraft, you kind of need to figure out what's in between those pillars and how to represent those statues that you don't have the proper blocks to represent. So that's, I think the answer is absolutely. What do you think, Pix?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the conundrum that the cosplay community often has when people
Mm-hmm.
haven't seen like a certain costume that they want to do from the back, and you
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to figure out, on the fly what you're supposed to be doing with that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like you can decide whether or not to make the structure completely symmetrical and have the back be the same on the front and that kind of thing. But I think, yeah, like Minecraft often encourages an interest in real world building methods
Yeah.
just through the way they give you access to these resources. Let's
Mm-hmm.
take the recent edition of Packed Mud from
Yeah.
1.19 as a
Such
good
a good
example of this.
block.
Because yeah, it's a great block,
Yeah.
and one of the way you typically get hold of it, because I don't think it generates naturally anywhere. It's not
No.
part of a natural structure in the
Mm-hmm.
world. You acquire mud itself from all kinds of places, mainly mangrove
Mm-hmm.
swamps if you want to find a block, but you can also create mud by pouring a bottle of water onto a dirt block, and you can get dirt anywhere in the world. You can get bottles of water relatively easily. But then in order to craft it into packed mud, which feels more like a construction material, you can then turn it into mud bricks once you have blocks of that. You have to combine it with wheat, which is, a building method that people will use to make mud into a more structural material elsewhere. It kind of helps bind the mud together, and that's been used as a building material for, correct me if I'm wrong here, but probably millennia, exactly. So I do think there's a lot of value to be had in just contemplating the reasons that we have access to the stuff that we have. I mean, even the use of a pickaxe as a tool is something that should give you pause for thought every so often and go, what's the history behind humanity themselves using these kind of tools? And that is incidentally something you can find at ArchaeoPlays YouTube channel. So we'll get a swift plug in there. Go and check out Heather's series, because just learning about how silly it is that we make wooden tools at the start of the game has kind of changed my perspective on the early game of Minecraft. So I thoroughly recommend it.
It is a bit silly, and ignore the fact that I fall into a ravine in episode 1 because I hit the wrong button. Just gloss over that. It happens to
the best of us. It happens to the best of us. It happened to me all the time.
But yeah, it's what's funny is that we were talking a little bit about the wooden tools as well on when we were building Petra, and then I saw on Twitter an archaeology story where they found an intact wooden shovel. And I was like, we spoke too soon.
Yes. The Minecraft players were there early. They did it. Yes.
Yeah. So the wooden pickaxe I'm still skeptical on. But at least for mining stone with a wooden pickaxe. But yeah, it's definitely interesting playing Minecraft from an archaeology perspective for me, because a lot of my stuff, my content is teaching people about either humanity or a different site or archaeology itself. And so it's, for example, approaching villages, I can't just go and raid the village like pretty much every player does, or, get additional villagers. If I have a village that doesn't have a farmer in it, it's not really my place, actually, in an archaeological, anthropological playthrough to bring a farmer to that village. So the first village I found had 4 leather workers and a blacksmith. And I was like, this is the least useful village for me to be in.
The most industrial village you'll ever find.
It was, so we had a whole talk about, the episodes there are talking a lot about different economies and how to kind of ingratiate yourself with a group that you've never met before. But yeah, it is one of those things of, oh, right, I'm not going to approach this village for produce, because they're not going to have any. So yeah, it's definitely very interesting. I am very conscious that the next talk in our conference is happening soon, and archaeologists are reviewing the Uncharted movie, which is also pretty apt following this talk, because there's a degree to which Pixlriffs skin for Empire's SMP looks a bit like Nathan Drake. So
a little bit, yeah. Bit. I gave 3 different reference images which were nothing to do with Uncharted to an artist who was going to do the skin for me, and they came back as Nathan Drake, and I went, well, I guess this is fate. Right. It's happening. But please do stick around for that. I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. I will recommend Emma Yasui's talk on Zelda Breath of the Wild and the influence of the Jomon period. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yes.
Really fascinating stuff. I watched that talk earlier and I thought it was really cool. Breath of the Wild is another influence that I'm bringing to my Empire's SMP series, along with Elden Ring, which there is going to be a talk about tomorrow, which I'm very excited for, although it's quite late for me, so I may not stay up in time to watch it, but I'll definitely catch the VOD. But if people want to see more of me, you can find me at youtube.com/pixlriffs and here on Twitch at twitch.tv/pixlriffs as well, spelt the way it is down there on the screen. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a fantastic talk, and hopefully people got a kick out of it.
Yes, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's been really fun to chat, really fun to build Petra.
Yes. On that subject briefly before we go,
sure.
I'll be able to download this world from the server we played on. I can send it to you, and then maybe you can make it available for people who want to download it from your YouTube channel. If you want to give them like a quick tour and stuff, then they can look around these sites for themselves and start to learn a little bit more.
I did save a schematic of it a Lightmatica schematic of it earlier
Oh,
today.
awesome.
So yeah,
Great.
so
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
great too. Yeah, and so you can find Pixlriffs, as he said, he's Pixlriffs pretty much everywhere. So not spelled the way it is at the bottom of the
Occasionally
screen.
spilled.
Occasionally spilled. All of us are occasionally spilled. And myself, I'm ArchaeoPlays. It's spelled the same way. It's like Archaeology and Plays mushed together. You can find me there on pretty much any social media. And yeah, I hope all of you enjoyed this talk, and I hope those of you who are interested, which is hopefully all of you, stick around for archaeologists reviewing the Uncharted film, which is probably going to be a hoot and a half of
I bet.
archaeologists discussing a few years ago, there was an archaeologist who live tweeted playing Uncharted, and it was hilarious. So I can only imagine what archaeologists reviewing the film is going to be. But yes, thank you all for tuning in. Don't go anywhere. We're going to sign off just now, and the next talk is going to start, I think, as soon as possible. So like 5 minutes max. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.
Alright, we should be live. I'll wait for confirmation.
We are live. I can see us.
Yay!
There we are.
Nice. We made it.
Alright. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Sorry for the delay. My name is Rihanna Bennett. I'm an archaeologist located in Florida. These are my lovely participants, so I'll let them introduce themselves personally in a few seconds. But what we're going to be doing today is I'm pretty sure we have a block of 2 hours. We'll just see how much we use. Probably not all of it, maybe just 1 hour, we'll see. We'll see how everyone's feeling, how much they need to vent. This is going to be a safe, secure session where anyone can vent their frustrations or talk about what they love, because there are parts about it that I did like. So this is going to be a safe space for everyone to present their opinions freely. But we're going to be discussing the Uncharted movie that released earlier this year, starring Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg, and some other people whose name I can't think of at the top of my head. But
Antonio Banderas.
Banderas, I can't forget him. And the woman that was in what was it, Sabrina the Teenage Witch?
Yeah, with the great hair.
I liked her. But yeah, so that movie, in case you guys didn't know, why we're here today is because the Uncharted film is based off of a series of video games that have released over the last decade, I feel like. I basically grew up playing them, so not like since middle school or anything, maybe like college and on. But yeah.
2011 was the first one. 2011, I think.
Oh yeah, basically college. So that's, because I think I started 2012. But yeah, so we're just going to discuss kind of the movie. We're going to try and stick to the movie, but we're definitely going to bring it into the video game sphere and kind of discuss how we feel about video games being adapted into media, what we think of as archaeologists and how it's presented, or is this even archaeology that's being presented? We're just going to kind of pick away at that. But with that, I'm going to let everyone else introduce themselves. I guess we can start clockwise, so I think that's below me.
Is that me?
Yeah.
That's you, Anna. Yeah.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Kuhn. I go by Short Round Online. I'm an archaeologist in Washington State, and I have not actually played the Uncharted games before. I've known about them for a really long time, obviously, but I've never owned a PlayStation, so I've never been able to play them. But I have seen the movie, and I am the resident Tom Holland specialist on this panel, so that's why I'm here. So let's move it over to Bill.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Farley. I'm an anthropology professor at Southern Connecticut State University, which is, as the name implies, in Connecticut, and then been an archaeologist for around 15 years.